Hello, and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Tian Yu. Coming up in this edition, U.S. President Joe Biden has addressed the nation on his exit from the 2024 presidential election, saying he's passing the torch to a new generation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had spoken at a joint session of the U.S. Congress in an attempt to shore up support for his country's military campaign in Gaza. Typhoon Gaemi has made landfall in southern China after leaving 14 people dead and over 600,000 displaced in the Philippines. We begin in the United States. U.S. President Joe Biden has addressed the nation on his exit from the 2024 presidential election. The 81-year-old says the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. Poppy Mpunting has more in Washington.
In his speech from the Oval Office, he cut a very serious and somber but forceful tone. He talked about values such as honesty, trust, respect, the values that he believes that the American people hold, and said that it was really important for him to step down for the good of the country as well as the American people. Of course, this comes after weeks of speculation about Biden's mental health after he came face-to-face with Donald Trump in a debate just last month, in which he was confused very often. He rambled at other times. And there was real concern, not just among voters and the public watching, but those within his own party, that he wasn't mentally fit enough to take on Donald Trump at the polls. And subsequently, there was a ramping up and a chorus of calls for him to step down and pass on the torch to another leader, somebody who had a greater chance of actually beating Donald Trump come November.
You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
And with that, shortly after making that announcement on Sunday that he was exiting the race for re-election, Biden endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. Indeed, a new and fresh generation. Donald Trump as well as J.D. Vance have gone on the attack and the offensive almost immediately. Trump held a rally in which he criticized Kamala Harris for being radical.
Nasty people, the Democrats, so we better beat them or we're not going to have a country left. You're not going to have a country left. So now we have a new victim to defeat. Lion Kamala Harris, Lion, L-Y-I-N apostrophe. The most incompetent and far-left vice president in American history.
He also made mention of the insecurity at the southern border and undocumented immigrants into the United States, really stoking that idea that America is in trouble and that he is the person who is going to fix it. On top of that, J.D. Vance himself also on the attack. And a lot of Republicans, similarly, have complained the fact that Joe Biden has exited the race and nominated Kamala Harris is anti-democratic. That is a message that the Republicans are running very strong with now, in part, of course, because their main criticism of Joe Biden was that he is too old. And now, with Kamala Harris front and center, it's Trump who is too old, some might say.
That was Poppy Mpunting reporting from Washington. Staying in the U.S., the Israeli Prime Minister has addressed a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress in an attempt to shore up support and funding for his country's military campaign in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu's goal remains the same, eradicating Hamas following the October 7th attacks in Israel. But he has faced criticism in Washington, with groups demonstrating against his visit and continued U.S. support for Israel. Nathan King has more.
No world leader has addressed the US Congress as many times as Benjamin Netanyahu. It's his fourth address, but none like this. Of course, his country's still at war with Hamas in Gaza after the October 7th massacre of last year. He compared it to Pearl Harbor too. Let's take a listen.
3,000 Hamas terrorists stormed into Israel. They butchered 1,200 people from 41 countries, including 39 Americans. Proportionately, compared to our population size, that's like 20 9/11s in one day.
He is here to shore up wavering American support for the war that many, including in the administration, think has gone on far too long, with approaching 40,000 dead Palestinians. The toll has been too high and not enough aid. He comes at a time of political turmoil, not just in Israel, but here in the US, as Joe Biden steps aside for Kamala Harris for the Democratic nomination. It looks like that she has sewn up. He will be meeting with both those leaders. They do have a slight difference in opinion. Kamala Harris stressing much more the need for a ceasefire and more aid to Palestinians, but stopping short of dumping their closest ally in the Middle East. Netanyahu accused protesters here in the US and across the world of essentially being puppets of Iran. Really strong speech indeed. And while he is here, there are a lot of people in Israel and, let's face it, the US that think he's mainly here to bolster his political reputation back home. He is widely blamed for security lapses that led up to the October 7th massacre and the response. He's accused of not wanting to end the war, to delay an inquiry. His government is wobbling. And so therefore, before he left, there were actual families of the hostages still kept in Gaza. We don't know how many are alive, saying that he shouldn't go until the hostages are released and there is a ceasefire. He very much stressed the plight of the hostages here at the US Congress.
The pain these families have endured is beyond words. I met with them again yesterday, and I promised them this: I will not rest until all their loved ones are home. All of them.
Benjamin Netanyahu is known to be quite close to former President Donald Trump. He will be meeting him in Mar-a-Lago on Friday. There is a lot of pressure on announcement of a ceasefire, but as you know, the shuttle diplomacy from the US, around the Middle East and elsewhere has not led to a ceasefire. We are told we're close, but we've heard that before. Will this visit make any difference? We'll have to wait and see.
That was Nathan King on the Israeli Prime Minister's controversial US tour. Turning to Europe, the competition director of Paris 2024 has acknowledged that this Olympics will be the first in history to feature an equal number of male and female athletes. Aurélien Merle said he's proud to have helped achieve gender parity this summer. Women will account for 40% of technical officials this year, up from 30% in Tokyo in 2020. Merle also consulted with experts to balance TV broadcast time for men's and women's events. Greg Lafrati spoke with the competition director.
For the first time in the history of the Olympics, these games will achieve gender parity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Actually, we're super proud to be the first Olympic Games to be gender equal. In Paris, we're the first time in 1900 where there were women participating. There were only 2%. So having like gender equality showed that we have games aligned with our times. But also we wanted to go one step further. We wanted to ensure that also that women's sport had full visibility and the same as men's sport. We're also ensuring that we're starting our games with a mixed event in shooting, and after we'll have the first medal will be delivered to a woman in diving, and we'll finish our games with basketball women. So everything we've done is to increase visibility for women's sports and increase visibility for the women's athletes. The same when it comes to, for example, our volunteers are going to be gender parity as well in the sports team and across the organization, because again we want to leave a legacy for the future in sports administration to ensure that we have these great talented young women who will go and be experienced in sporting organization delivery.
Now, gender parity is not just for the athletes, but also the officials. And I understand that you've had a huge increase in the number of female officials also for these games.
Yes, exactly. You are correct. We really wanted gender parity to be across, all aspects, because the field of play is the most visible things. And when we worked tirelessly with the international federation, with our national federation, so they could train, new officials. So there were 70-30 were the ratio in Tokyo. And I think 4 years' time, 3 years' time, actually, we have now like 60-40, and we hope that in the next games we can have a gender parity, but it's already like a great achievement.
It's one thing to achieve gender parity, but another important aspect, of course, is to make sure that women and men both get the same exposure, and providing equal TV time was perhaps a challenge or something. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we worked with an expert who was able to tell us how exactly where we should put the different women's events to ensure that we will have equal visibility for women's sports than men. And we worked as well with OBS for the broadcasting, and the French broadcasters as well, and the international ones. We also worked with the International Federation, and everyone really wanted the Paris game to be full gender parity. So with everyone around, I think we managed to reach that, and there will be, like some amazing new female events in the forefront.
That was Greg Lafradi speaking with the Executive Director of Sport Competitions at Paris 2024, Aurélie Merle. Here in Asia, before pummeling Taiwan with heavy downpours, Typhoon Gaemi was also intensifying the seasonal monsoon in the Philippines. The storm has left 14 dead and displaced over 600,000 in the country. Relentless rain drenched the northern part of the island nation on Wednesday, triggering floods in Manila and deadly landslides. Chris Mondo reports from Manila.
Major thoroughfares and expressway in Metro and Mega Manila are flooded due to heavy rains brought by Typhoon Gaemi and the southwest monsoon. The heavy and non-stop rains brought traffic on 24 roads in Metro Manila to a standstill, with 20 other roads offering only limited mobility. In some areas, the flood waters rose above 5 feet, enough to drown an average height person. Even the North Luzon Expressway, or NLEX, the main gateway of Metro Manila, for those coming from North and Central Luzon, was not spared from severe flooding. The south part of the expressway going towards Manila has been closed, with vehicles being abandoned due to the rising waters. Power outages are rampant in the area covered by the country's biggest distribution facility, the Manila Electric Company, or Meralco. According to Meralco, as of 4 p.m. local time, nearly 500,000 of its customers experienced power outages. Power restoration can commence only when water subsides. Earlier, President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. held a meeting with the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. Evacuation efforts are still ongoing, and President Marcos has called for swift assistance to those affected by Typhoon Gaemi.
That was Chris Mondo on the aftermath of a powerful typhoon in the Philippines. In Nepal, 18 people have died after a small plane crashed during takeoff. The plane was heading from Kathmandu to Pokhara for regular maintenance on Wednesday. 2 crew members and 17 technicians were on board. The pilot is the only survivor. Senior editor Mahendra Subedi at the National News Agency of Nepal has more details.
The national is mourning today for the demise of those people killed in the plane crash that happened on Wednesday. The postmortem and identification of the deceased is ongoing in a hospital in Kathmandu, and officials said that it could take around 72 hours after the matching with the details provided by the relatives and the families of the deceased.
I was sitting in my store chatting with someone when I heard a loud noise. We didn't know what it was, so we ran out to see. We saw the plane fall into the open field by the side of the runway, and the plane was on fire, taxiing in flames for a while.
And also officials said, and the pilot of the plane, the only survivor in the crash, is receiving treatment in a hospital in Kathmandu. The government has formed a 5-member commission to probe the Saur Airlines crash. And the commission has been given 45 days to submit a report. The government's spokesperson and Minister for Information, Prithvi Subagurung, confirmed the government used to form such commissions after the crash, and such crash, commissions formed to investigate those crashes. I had pointed out the technical issues and human error are the main reasons behind the crash. In Nepal, nearly 350 people have lost their life, in plane crash since 2000.
That was Mahendra Subedi reporting from Kathmandu. Recapping today's headlines. U.S. President Joe Biden has addressed the nation on his exit from the 2024 presidential election, saying he's passing the torch to a new generation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had spoken at a joint session of the U.S. Congress in an attempt to shore up support for his country's military campaign in Gaza. Typhoon Gaemi has made landfall in southern China after leaving 14 people dead and over 600,000 displaced in the Philippines. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Tianyu. Thank you for listening.